sexual violence in sports through registration. And I think it's a perfect timing. I just learned it's going to be 500 days from today. We have Tokyo Olympics, so it's a perfect time to talk about that.
Whoa,
Yeah? Okay, so
500 days.
500 days, Nancy. There you go.
Well, first of all, I want to say this is the first time I've gotten to speak with Jen Sey, and I've known her story for a long time, and we've been friends, but that was really extraordinary. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I also want to say how great it is to be able to be here and be able to take the work that my organization is called Champion Women, and take the work that Champion Women has done and hopefully move it internationally so that it's, we can replicate what we've done throughout the world. I'd like to introduce somebody here who's also involved in international human rights, and it's Minky Wharton, who works at Human Rights Watch. And Minky has been great in introducing me to so many people in the international space, and so that we can use this as a time right now to be able to make the kind of changes that we need to make. All right, let me backtrack just a little bit. So, how many of you all are from or live in the United States? Okay, and how many of you live abroad? Anywhere? Okay, so most, okay, it's like maybe 15%, I'd say, that don't live in the United States. So, in the United States, the reason why I got to be in the Olympics was because of a wonderful statute called Title IX. Title IX says that if you offer boys a sports program associated with a school, you have to provide the same type of educational opportunity for girls and women. And so I probably would have, I started training hard when I was about 11. By 12, I was #1 in the country for 12-year-olds. By the time I was 14, I was #1 in the world for women. And by the time I was 15, like you, I moved away from home to train for the 1980 Olympics. For those of you who are too young to remember. The United States boycotted those Olympics, as did about half the world. They were held in the Soviet Union. So I really thought that my Olympics just wasn't going to happen. But because of the statute Title IX, it passed in 1972, and then the regulations came out in 1975 that applied to sports, that suddenly by my junior, maybe like my senior year in college, it was like somebody took a blowtorch to the country and there were opportunities everywhere. I could have gone anywhere in the country on full scholarship except for an Ivy League school. So like that. So when I was growing up, the team that I trained with, the guys came home for the summer and the size of our team doubled over the summer because we had all these guys coming back. We had no women coming back. It was just the guys. And the narrative that we heard was, well, women peak when they're young. They physically peak, so that's why you don't see women who are older in the Olympics. Well, no. The truth was there were no opportunities for women. And so they usually quit right after high school. But I was one of the very fortunate few at that time, and I went to Duke University on full scholarship, and was able to that's sort of what kept me in it. At the 1984 Olympics, Donna Deverona came and said, you know, you're about to become famous. And I heard that part. And then she goes, and what are you going to do with it? And I never thought about sort of number two, like what could I do with this? And she goes, I hope it has to do something with Title IX. So I interned at a women's organization and worked with them for 30 years, doing all kinds of Title IX work. As a lawyer, I brought a lot of Title IX cases, both with athletes and with coaches, and very soon the Title IX legislation also started really getting traction when it came to sexual violence on campus, okay? So there was a big lawsuit at University of Colorado football players raped Lisa Simpson at an off-campus party, and the court held that University of Colorado was responsible. And so the plaintiffs and defendants' lawyers hired me to go work with the school for 5 years. And what I learned in doing that was that there is a playbook, right? If this, then this. If this, then this. And right, you know, like what happens in every conceivable situation. And okay, so I got very, very comfortable doing that, even a little bored, but then around 2010, I started getting calls from athletes like Jen, who would say the exact same thing happened to them that was happening at colleges all over the country, except they were part of the club and Olympic sport movement. Okay, so these are sports programs that are not associated with schools. Okay, so how many of you all have a child or a neighbor or a niece or nephew who participates in sports that are not part of their school program? Anybody? Okay. Yeah, I would actually, I'm surprised it's not more than that. Because as we were saying, this is a huge movement. It's one of the largest card-carrying member organizations in the world, is the Olympic movement. For most countries, the Olympic movement is their entire sports system. They don't have sports that are associated with schools, right? They don't have, like, we've got the NCAA, we've got high school sports, right? They don't have any of that. They've got the Olympic movement, people go to clubs that are close to where they are, and as they get older, they may move, right? So two very different kind of systems. And what I realized very quickly as an attorney, that unlike the school, that what was going on in the clubs was there was no protection for children or adults regarding sexual abuse. And it's hard to like wrap your head exactly around how bad that it was, in that, imagine, for those of you who are attorneys out there, sort of question number one is, there was no insurance. United States Swimming had a separate policy for sexual abuse that only gave $100,000, and it was called a wasting policy, which meant that the defense fees came off the top, which meant that the defense lawyer just had to keep it at bay for a certain amount of time, and then they knew that the plaintiff's lawyer would kind of figure out, there's really nothing for me to get here. The club, a lot of times didn't have any assets. Right, schools have assets, they've got buildings, and right, so there was nothing to go after. Two is the national governing bodies. So in the United States, there are 50 of them. So that would be USA Taekwondo, USA Swimming, USA Track and Field, USA, right, name the sport. Okay, so it's all these different, there's 50 of them. The national governing body, and then the USOC is sort of the umbrella organization for all of that. Would deny legal liability. They would deny any responsibility for addressing sexual abuse. So I thought, well, that's weird. Like, schools have to do so much over here, and these clubs are really... And then I started thinking about just the fact that for my coach, in 1984, my Olympic coach was dating my teammate, okay? He was not dating her. She was 16 years old. He was molesting her. And what we had to do, his name's Mitch Ivey, he's now on the banned list, but what we had to do for 30 years to keep him from getting hired. So women with a total of about 15 Olympic gold medals would, when we thought somebody was gonna hire him, would go to the club. Sometimes they would call us. What do you think? We hear, and he's so cheap. Wow. I mean, usually somebody who with his caliber coach should be probably making about $250,000 a year. And they were, in some cases, he was offering to work for free. And like that is like, should be like red flag. But you know, 25 that, right? Yeah, right. Larry Nassar, work for free. Okay. so what we, sort of, instead of the national governing body, USA Swimming, doing the job of saying this guy is not allowed to coach as part of the USA Swimming system, it was up to this group of Olympians who were well-known to contact the club and say, you do not want anything to do with this guy, right? Now that's, right, so in 2010, USA Swimming gets creamed on 2020 for their terrible addressing of sexual abuse. And basically their response was, look, sexual abuse is everywhere. It's in churches, it's in schools, it's in neighborhoods, it's in families, it's everywhere. This is a police problem, this is a parent's problem, this is a club problem. They really need to address that. In other words, not them. I can't tell you the difference between the law, between a school or any other youth-serving organization and what was going on in the Olympic movement. It's legally is night and day between those two systems. So very slowly but surely we were making progress. In 2012, I don't want to take you through every step, but the highlights are 2012, I got the Olympic Committee to, I had to go over the head of the Olympic Committee. His name was Scott Blackman. So I had to go over his head to the board of the USOC and kind of explain to them. And they were all like, well, yeah, sure, well, why don't I do that? Of course, yeah. So we got them to prohibit, the USOC required all national governing bodies to prohibit romantic and sexual relationships between the coaches and the athletes they coach, regardless of age or consent. So we want to protect the 25-year-old just like we protect the Weinstein actresses, the same way that we want to protect, the 12-year-old. And consent is really not an issue. It is, you can get a 3-year-old to consent, right? You can get we talked about this in Japan about a woman who quote unquote consented to getting beaten. So it's a bright line rule the same way that it is, it's a bright line rule for many, many professions. In society, when we think about how do we protect people, men and women, boys, kids and adults, from sexual abuse? So on the one hand, we protect children. And we have all these rules and regulations about how child-serving organizations treat children. The United States Olympic Committee and the national governing bodies did not and would not see themselves as child youth-serving organizations. Even though in swimming, it's 93% children are members of the national governing body. Probably gymnastics, it's even more than 93%, right? So the normal rules that adults can't be alone with children, and you don't give them a gift, and you can't text them individually without also including their parents, and on and on, right? The normal ways that we protect children, they would not adopt those kind of procedures. Two is we have rules for people when there's a power differential. So if you're an employee, probably 90% of this audience is protected from sexual abuse by Title VII. Title VII says that you can't be discriminated in employment by sex discrimination, and sexual harassment and sexual abuse and sexual violence are all types of sex discrimination. So you can't have that. And so we also protect students under Title IX, and we protect people who are in prison, we protect people who are in public housing, we protect every way that you can think of. We protect people who are in a subservient position. Okay, two. Third is we protect people by regulating the profession that they're in. So I'm a lawyer, and I'm regulated by the Florida Bar Association, and if I have sex with a client, I will lose my license. Same with physicians and therapists and religious leaders and prison guards and right on and on. When you think of a hierarchical relationship, I guarantee you're going to find if there's a licensing teachers, you will lose your licensing. Okay, do coaches lose any licensing if somebody came forward and said that they sexually abused them? Answer: no. there is no licensing. There was no licensing. They weren't even doing background checks. So all three ways that we typically protect the population, men, women, boys, girls, from abuse, wasn't going on in the Olympic movement. So people could be really abusive in gymnastics. I didn't get that same kind of treatment, in part because swimming is a very objective sport. So swimming, it's first or second Olympic trials makes the Olympic team. No, but I didn't have to kiss up to anybody in order to, I didn't have to be liked. I didn't have to, I mean, I was, of course. but I didn't have to, right, I didn't have to in order to make a team, and right, that sort of wasn't part of the game the way that it is in gymnastics, is you have to be so obedient and so compliant. What made my sport particularly dangerous, the reason why we've had over 1,000 victims come forward of sexual abuse in my sport, is because coaches dated their athletes. It was just a cultural norm that I think that when in gymnastics, when girls were getting abused, like they knew that it was young, right? Like
everything, all day.
Yeah.
Everyone.
But was it ever sort of couched in the terms of this is a relationship?
No, that was in the 70s. We then evolved past that. There was a very famous coach, Dick Mola, who married his athlete, Linda Matheny, who was an Olympian in 72, I think. And at that point, the sport, was also very physically, I mean, coaches openly hit kids. We sort of moved past that a little bit in the 80s. You couldn't date, and oftentimes the best gymnasts are 11 or 12, like what you described, and so, no, that wasn't part of the culture, but as you've described it, there's a culture of extreme cruelty. That's the sort of dominant culture in gymnastics, is one of cruelty. You're not a good coach if you're not cruel.
Yeah, swimming doesn't have that. There are definitely very cruel coaches that I've heard, but they kind of, like, it's not cool, it's not cool. Yeah, right. It's not sort of part of the DNA of the sport is cruelty.
Yeah, right? It absolutely is in gymnastics, and that's one of the things, I mean, like, they do it publicly, whether it's on CNN or on the competition floor. They berate and belittle and storm off and yell and scream in very abusive manner, literally on the competition floor. Get rid of them. Don't accept it. It's there. It's on television. If we just say no more, that says to other coaches this is not acceptable behavior, but we don't do that, and so that becomes the norm. And then you have the Carolis who came to the United States in the 80s and just absolutely validated those behaviors. They didn't bring it here. It was here. They validated it. Because then we went from having an abusive culture to an abusive winning culture. And then we will start winning all the gold medals.
So we talked about this before, so I already know the answer. Tell me, do you think that you need to be abusive in order to win?
Absolutely not. In fact, I think we lose so many amazing kids along the way, and I think I would have continued far longer. One, if I'd been allowed to heal, which was part of the abuse. Two, if I'd been allowed to eat. And three, use other we don't need cruelty to motivate us. These child athletes are the most motivated people you will ever see in your life. And I think about some of the women I've come to know that were abused by Nassar. Maddie Larson comes to mind. And she was a spectacular athlete, and we lost her, not just because of Nassar, but because of her own coaches who were incredibly cruel and just absolutely emotionally and physically abusive. And she's 20 years younger than I am, and we marvel at how similar our experiences were. They're done now, her coaches.
They are?
Yeah.
Okay.
Nancy, your time is up.
Okay.
So, but one last question is that, so because of those things, you're trying to tackle with the discrimination with the registration.
Right.
And then that is the Safe Sports Act. Would you talk a little bit about that?
A little bit about it. Yes, I know.
Yes?
Okay, so the USOC could have, on their own, made all the changes that it took a federal law to get, right? you don't, they could have said, we will assume a legal duty of care for athletes against physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. But they wouldn't. So it took Congress. She took her 6-week-old baby from California over to Washington, D.C. to meet with Senator Feinstein to get the process going. So the statute does a number of things, and it actually amends a number of different statutes, but it gives the USOC this legal duty. It's a huge deal. Number two is it gives people within the Olympic movement, including parents and officials and coaches and athletes, a legal duty to report abuse. And if they don't within 24 hours, that they can have a criminal issue. It does a whole bunch of other things, but again, things like children cannot be alone with adults unless it's an interruptible and observable distance. That they could have had that rule, and they refused to enact that rule. They made the federal government enact that rule, and so we got that statute passed. But if we don't change the power dynamics, if we don't change what she's talking about now, we are part of a group. I mean, I run an organization, Champion Women. We're part of a group called the Committee to Restore Integrity to the United States Olympic Committee, and we are working to change the architecture, like who gets to vote. Okay, when a dollar comes in, there's a natural conflict. Does it go to an executive or does it go to the athlete? Okay, right now, I'll tell you what, okay, the executives make $1 million a year, a lot of them. And the athletes, about $1,000 a month. Right, so that should tell you how much power that the Olympians, that the athletes have within the system. So we have to like build a better mousetrap so that we can give athletes power over their own careers. So they're not beholden, they don't have to be obedient and compliant in order to be able to really fulfill. I mean, the part that I loved about the Olympics, the thing that you loved about gymnastics was, you know, I was truly gifted at something, and it brought me this enormous joy to be able to do. I felt beautiful and powerful and lovely, and right, in a way that, like, you know, it's hard to get other places in your life. So, thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. And